Allie Costell's friends, they're making sure of that.
The Ole Miss student from St. Louis was shot to death last weekend. There must have been...
Thoughts tonight. There's where nobody does what she did, especially.
Murder case right here in our area. 21-year-old Allie Costel was about to enter her senior year at Ole Miss when she was found dead with multiple gunshot wounds.
On the last Friday of her life, Allie smiled at a classmate on the Ole Miss campus and said she was having a great summer. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours, a man she had trusted for 3 years would drive her to a dark lake at the edge of a Mississippi forest and make sure she never came home. That smile. Everyone who knew Alexandria Allie Costial mentions it first. Not her looks, not her grades, not her accomplishments. The smile. Wide, warm, the kind that made strangers feel like old friends within seconds. It was the first thing people noticed, and, according to those who loved her, the last thing they could let go of after she was gone. Alexandria Costial was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, the daughter of Keith and Cindy Costial. She grew up in a close, loving family, alongside her younger brother Andrew. From her earliest years, Allie was the kind of young woman who threw herself into everything. As a high schooler at Lindbergh High School, she was a cheerleader, ran track and field, and played golf. She was not just an athlete, she was a connector. The girl who made sure the new kid at practice felt welcome. The one who remembered your birthday, your dog's name, the name of the boy you liked. Her mother, Cindy, would later describe her as someone who made every room feel warmer simply by walking into it. Golf, in particular, became one of Allie's defining passions. She started her own golf club at Ole Miss her freshman year, open to both boys and girls, a small but telling detail about who she was. She did not wait for opportunities to exist. She created them. She recruited members, organized outings, and eventually became the club's president. In a university of over 20,000 students, she built her own community from scratch. The University of Mississippi was a dream she had held for years. Her mother, Cindy, said one of the reasons Allie specifically wanted to attend Ole Miss was because of the flowers that bloomed across campus, a detail so deeply Allie that it makes people who hear it ache a little. She enrolled in the fall of 2016, pursuing a degree in marketing through the School of Business Administration. She dreamed of working in the fashion industry after graduation. She had plans, a whole life sketched out in her mind. Internships, cities, a career doing something creative, something meaningful. On campus, Allie was a yoga and Pilates instructor in teaching fitness classes at the campus recreation center. This was not a side job she stumbled into for extra money. It was an extension of her personality. She loved the discipline of it, the community of it, the way movement could change someone's entire mood. Her students adored her. She showed up for every class with energy, presence, and that smile. According to her father, Keith Costial, she was teaching fitness groups that very summer, in addition to attending marketing classes. Even when most students had gone home for the break, Allie stayed in Oxford. She had things to do. She was building something. She was also a former member of the Alpha Phi sorority and a member of the Alpha Kappa Psi business fraternity. Her social world at Ole Miss was wide and genuine. These were not surface-level acquaintances. They were people who drove to college with her, held her when she cried, stayed up late talking about life. Longtime friend Cassidy Desnoyer, who had known Allie since Lindbergh High School and was also her sorority sister at Ole Miss, described her as kind-hearted and someone who was never without a smile. "She was genuinely the brightest light I've ever come across," Denoyer said. Denoyer also remembered that Allie spent her summers going on mission trips. She cared about people and just wanted to help, she told ABC News. This was not a performance of goodness. Everyone who knew Allie tells the same story, from the same place of genuine grief. She was the real thing. Her roommate later took to social media to share some of Allie's favorite things, a list that read like a portrait of a vivid, ordinary, beautiful young life. Yoga, Pilates, smoothies, Uber Eats, and karaoke. She loved flowers, as her mother had always known. She loved music. She loved Ole Miss with the specific devotion of someone who had chosen it deliberately, who had looked at those blooming magnolias and thought, "Yes, this is where I belong." At 21 years old, Allie Costiel was entering her senior year. She was so close to the finish line: a degree, a career, a future. A classmate named Sarah Raviani, who shared a business class with Allie, had seen her on campus the day before she was killed. "On Friday, I saw her smiling and happy. She was content and had an excitement for life that captivated my attention every single day," Raviani said. That Friday evening, Allie was seen on surveillance video at 11:52 p.m. leaving a bar in Oxford Square. Investigators say she got into an Uber and went home alone. She returned to her apartment. Her roommates were there. She was safe. She was home. She was fine. But somewhere across that same college town, a young man was already moving, already thinking, already deciding. Allie is survived by her father Keith, her mother Cindy, and her brother Andrew. A family that had poured every hope they had into a girl who deserved every single one of those hopes. A girl who loved flowers and golf and helping people feel strong in their bodies. A girl who had, in 3 years at a university in Mississippi, built a world full of people who loved her. That world was about to be shattered. And the person holding the hammer was someone Allie already knew. Someone she had trusted. Someone she had, in her own complicated way, cared for. His name was Brandon Thiesfeld, and what he was planning that night had nothing to do with the version of himself he had shown her. To look at Brandon Austin, Thiesfeld from the outside, you would have seen exactly what he wanted you to see. A young man from a wealthy Texas family, a business student at a prestigious Southern university, confident, socially polished, the kind of person who walked into a room like he owned it. But the people who got close, the ones who shared dorm hallways with him, sat near him in class, heard the way he talked about women, they saw something else entirely, something colder, something that did not add up. Brandon Thiesfeld was born on April 5, 1997, in Fort Worth, Texas. His father, Daniel Thiesfeld, is a doctor in the Fort Worth area who owns and operates the Pain Management Center of Texas. His parents are divorced, and his mother is Carrie Ann Campbell Clay. He grew up in the world of private schools and country clubs, a world where money was not just comfort, it was a shield. From an early age, Brandon appeared to understand this. According to people who knew him, he referenced his father's wealth frequently, casually, as though it were a get-out-of-jail-free card he carried in his back pocket at all times. Thiesfeld attended Fort Worth Country Day School from 2012 to 2014, a private college preparatory institution, but did not return after his sophomore year for what the school described as academic reasons. This was the first sign that the image Brandon projected did not match reality. He was then enrolled at San Marcos Academy in San Marcos, Texas. A spokesperson for San Marcos Academy confirmed that Thiesfeld attended from the fall of 2014 until May 2016, when he graduated. In the fall of that same year, he enrolled at the University of Mississippi's School of Business Administration. On campus, Brandon Thiesfeld occupied a specific social lane. He was present at bars and parties. He moved in the same circles as sorority girls and business majors. But the persona he cultivated was, according to those who observed him closely, built on a foundation of arrogance, contempt, and a very particular kind of entitlement, the kind that comes from never being told no by anyone who mattered. Former dorm neighbor Rex Revita later described Thiesfeld as misogynistic and arrogant. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it. He was pretty much a daddy's boy type," Revita said. Constantly had to reference his father's money, how his dad could get him out of anything, just that attitude all the time. Any type of vulgar comment he could say, any type of rude comment to anybody in our dorm, any of the women. This was not locker room bluster, it was a consistent pattern. Revita told the Daily Beast that Thiesfeld definitely had a violent streak. And yet, in the way of so many men like him, Brandon Thiesfeld remained functional, enrolled in school, attending classes, maintaining enough of a social presence to seem normal to those who did not look closely. Privately, however, he was unraveling in ways that nobody around him fully understood until it was too late. By his own eventual admission, Brandon had developed a serious dependency on cocaine and alcohol. These were not occasional indulgences. They were, according to his own words, written in a letter later discovered by police, fuel for something far darker that already existed inside him. A legal pad found in his apartment during the investigation contained a 2-page handwritten letter to his family. In it, Thiesfeld wrote, "I'm not a good person. It is not your fault. Something in me just doesn't work. I've always had terrible thoughts. I've always had these feelings. I just kind of felt off." These were not the words of a man who suddenly snapped. These were the words of a man who had been walking toward violence for a long time. In 2015, Thiesfeld was arrested in Walton County, Florida, on a misdemeanor charge of possession of alcohol by a person under the age of 21. Adjudication was withheld, meaning the case was stricken from his record. It was a minor offense, easily dismissed. Well, his father's resources ensured it stayed that way. Brandon walked away clean, and the lesson he took from it was the same one he had always been taught. Consequences were for other people. In the fall of 2016, the same semester he arrived at Ole Miss, Brandon Thiesfeld met Ali Costial. They were both in the School of Business Administration. They had mutual friends. They ended up at the same bars, the same parties, the same corners of the campus social world. And somewhere in the easy overlap of their lives, something began between them. A relationship that was never quite defined, never quite committed, never quite real. According to Allie's friends, she and Brandon had an on and off romantic relationship, but were never officially boyfriend and girlfriend. For Allie, the connection was emotionally real, even when it was painful. For Brandon, it was something far more transactional. He appeared in her life when it suited him, and withdrew when it did not. Friends told the Daily Beast that Thiesfeld was allegedly emotionally abusive throughout the relationship, and that several of them had begged Allie to walk away from him. She had even reportedly described him to close friends as crazy aggressive. But she kept reaching for something in him that he was either incapable of giving or simply unwilling to. Then came April 2019. On April 12th, Allie informed Thiesfeld that she was concerned she might be pregnant. 2 days later, she sent him a photo of an inconclusive home pregnancy test. She wanted to meet in person. She wanted to talk, not through screens, not through texts, face to face, like two people who had shared something real. Brandon's response was to disappear. According to prosecutors, Thiesfeld's internet search history during this period revealed he was searching for abortion pills and abortion services. Contact between the two became exclusively electronic, and over the next 3 months, Allie pursued an in-person meeting while Thiesfeld consistently avoided her. His texts, when they came at all, were cold and directive. He wanted the pregnancy terminated. He wanted no child. He wanted, most of all, for Allie to stop asking him to show up. And then, in early July 2019, something shifted. Thiesfeld left Oxford and traveled to the Dallas-Fort Worth area where his father lived. 2 days later, he posted a photo on social media of a Glock Model 22.40 caliber pistol with the caption, "I'm finally taking my baby back to Oxford." The pistol had been purchased by his father. On the same day he posted the photo, Thiesfeld also searched the internet for silencers and suppressors for that model of gun. Read that again. The same day he announced he was bringing a gun back to campus, he looked up how to silence it. Thiesfeld traveled back to Oxford on July 16, 2019, at approximately 6:30 p.m., 4 days before Allie Kostial would be dead. Whatever Brandon Thiesfeld was planning in those final days, he had everything he needed. A weapon, a supply of cocaine and alcohol to dull whatever conscience he may have had left, and a young woman who still believed, despite everything she had been through with him, that he might finally agree to sit down and talk. She had no idea what kind of conversation he had actually decided to have. But 2 lives were now moving toward the same point in the Mississippi dark, one reaching out, one closing in, and only one of them knew what was waiting at the end of the drive. The last time Cindy Kostial heard her daughter's voice was around 7 o'clock on the evening of Friday, July 19th, 2019. They had just seen each other days earlier. Cindy and Keith had visited Allie at her apartment in Oxford, and Allie had not wanted them to leave. She wanted them to stay an extra day. She wanted Cindy to cook her home-cooked meals. They went shopping together, and because Allie loved beach themes, they bought new decor for her apartment. Things that reflected who she was. Sunsets, color, warmth, life. Her parents had driven back to St. Louis, and that Friday evening phone call was the last time a mother would hear her daughter laugh. Allie spent that Friday night the way any 21-year-old rising senior might spend a summer Friday in a college town. She went out. She saw friends. At 11:52 p.m., surveillance cameras in Oxford Square captured her leaving a bar. She got into an Uber and went home alone. The footage shows her walking in a white shirt and blue shorts, head slightly down, phone in hand. She looked relaxed. She looked fine. She looked like a young woman on her way home from a perfectly ordinary night out. What those cameras could not show was what was already in motion. Earlier that same Friday, July 19th, Brandon Thiesfeld had sent Allie a text message. He asked if she was going to be home that day because he could visit. Later that evening, after a few more texts from Allie, he wrote, "Just let me know when you are back from going out. Is your house private right now?" To Allie, those words likely felt like progress. After 3 months of near-total silence, he was finally reaching out. He wanted to see her. He was asking if they would be alone, which she may have interpreted as intimacy, as finally being ready to sit down and talk. Prosecutors would later observe the horrifying irony of those texts. In Allie's mind, she was probably thinking he wanted to talk about the pregnancy and work on the relationship. In his mind, according to investigators, he was thinking, "I don't want any witnesses when I get her in the car with me." Allie arrived home around midnight. Her roommates were there. She was home. She was safe. And then, at some point, in the very early hours of Saturday, July 20th, she left again. Her roommates did not hear her leave. She slipped out quietly, into the dark summer night, toward a car that was waiting for her. According to prosecutors, at around 1:28 a.m. on July 20th, 2019, Thiesfeld picked Allie up from her apartment. Together, they drove toward Sardis Lake. The route out of Oxford starts on familiar roads, lit streets, the edges of campus, the last gas stations on the way out of town. Then the city falls away. The road narrows, the lights disappear, the pavement gives way eventually to dirt. Once they turned off the main road, there would have been very few homes and no streetlights. It is a 45-minute drive into increasing isolation. It ends at an abandoned fishing camp on the edge of water, a place called Buford Ridge in the Harmontown community, about 30 miles from campus. Investigators believe that Brandon took Allie to the fishing camp, and once there, he shot her at least 9 times. Ballistics indicated that he was sitting across from her at a picnic table when he fired the first shot. According to details shared through Thiesfeld's own defense attorney, at some point before the shooting, Brandon had fired a shot across the lake, a reckless, impulsive gesture. Allie reportedly said, "Oh, you're crazy." They sat there and talked. Then he shot her. That sentence carries a weight that is almost impossible to hold. They sat and talked. She called him crazy in the light way people call someone crazy when they do something surprising and strange but not yet threatening. And then he turned the gun on her. Prosecutors stated that he shot her 8 times in the stomach. Lafayette County investigator Jarrett Bundren later described what he found. A white female laying on the ground, with multiple gunshot wounds to her back. He told CBS News, "I have not worked a murder where somebody has been shot that many times." There were 11 shell casings on the ground. Allie's purse was found on the side of the road with her school ID and her driver's license inside. Her phone was gone, taken, but her Apple Watch remained behind at her apartment, and it had recorded everything. Brandon Thiesfeld had been drinking and using cocaine that night. His attorney would later argue that the substances caused him to snap in the moment, but the phone searches for silencers, the trip to Fort Worth to collect the gun, the texts carefully confirming Allie would be alone. These do not describe a snap. They describe a plan. After the shooting, Thiesfeld drove back toward Oxford alone. He returned to his apartment, and there, sometime in the hours between leaving Allie's body at that remote fishing camp and the moment the world would begin looking for her, he sat down and wrote a letter. On a legal pad, in his own handwriting, he addressed his family. "I'm not a good person. It is not your fault. Something in me just doesn't work. I've always had terrible thoughts. I've always had these feelings. I just kind of felt off. I think this is the end for me. I'm either going to prison or going to die. I know I'm going to get caught." He knew. He wrote those words while Allie lay alone in the Mississippi dark. 30 miles away, and he knew exactly what he had done and what was coming. The morning of Saturday, July 20th, 2019, arrived the way summer mornings do in Mississippi. Slow and warm, the kind of morning that asks nothing of anyone. At 10:23 a.m., an officers with the Lafayette County Sheriff's Department on routine patrol in the Harmontown area discovered Allie's body at Buford Ridge. There was no dramatic call, no frantic tip. A deputy doing his job on a Saturday morning simply came upon a young woman lying on the ground near a lake, surrounded by shell casings and empty beverage cans, her purse beside her on the road. The news began to move, first through the sheriff's department, then through the university, then through the networks of friends who had known Allie, who had gone to high school with her, carpooled to Ole Miss with her, held her close on nights when she cried about a man who would not love her properly. Their phones lit up with the kind of message nobody is ever ready to receive. By that Saturday afternoon, Lafayette County investigators had confirmed Allie's identity and begun making calls. The name that kept coming up, from friend after friend, from person after person who had known Allie and known the complicated tangle of her relationship life, was the same name. Brandon. Once police confirmed Costial's identity, they immediately started calling her friends to ask about possible suspects. The name Brandon kept coming up. The Ole Miss community reeled. This was not a stranger. This was not a random act of violence from outside their world. This had happened within the campus, within the social circles of people who went to the same bars and took the same business classes and wore the same school colors on game day. When the fear that settled over Oxford that weekend was specific and intimate, the kind that comes from realizing that danger had been walking among them, smiling. An investigation was now officially underway. Investigators had a name. They had a motive forming in the evidence on Allie's Apple Watch. They had text messages stretching back months, painting a picture of a man who had spent the better part of a summer refusing to face a young woman in person, until the night he finally did. But Brandon Thiesfeld was already gone, and he was not planning to come back willingly. By Sunday afternoon, July 21st, 2019, investigators with the Lafayette County Sheriff's Department had a body, a name, and a clock ticking against them. And the name Brandon had surfaced too many times from too many different people who had known Allie to be dismissed as coincidence. Her cell phone was gone, but they found her Apple Watch in her bedroom. And inside that Apple Watch were some of Allie's final text messages, each one exchanged with Brandon Thiesfeld, the digital record of a young woman trying desperately to be heard by a man who had already decided her fate. Investigators reached out to Thiesfeld that Sunday. They told him they needed to speak with him about Allie. He made up excuses not to come in, but assured them he would meet with them Monday at 8:30 a.m. He sounded cooperative. He sounded calm. It was the same performance he had been giving everyone around him for years. Controlled, plausible, the face of a young man who had done nothing wrong. Monday morning arrived, so 8:30 came and went. Brandon Thiesfeld did not walk through the door of the police station. Lafayette County Assistant District Attorney Mickey Mallette later explained what happened next. Investigators began tracking Thiesfeld's phone in real time. What they saw made the situation immediately clear. He was on Interstate 55, heading north, away from Oxford, away from Mississippi, in the direction of Memphis, Tennessee. The route toward Texas, toward his father's house, toward whatever version of escape he believed was still available to him. District Attorney Ben Creekmore described the moment. When we saw that his truck was leaving Oxford, there was a bolo for his tag. The truck was not hard to identify. It featured a personalized license plate bearing the phrase TAK3IT, a vanity plate announcing exactly the kind of person Brandon Thiesfeld had always believed himself to be, someone who takes what he wants, answers to no one, and gets away with it. He did not get away with it. About an hour and a half to 2 hours after the bolo was issued, the Memphis Police Department's Fugitive Task Force spotted Thiesfeld at a gas station in South Memphis. He was arrested without incident. A police dash cam recorded the entire moment of him being taken into custody. When investigators from Lafayette County arrived to retrieve him, they found the evidence they needed right there in the truck and on his body. He had a .40 caliber gun consistent with the caliber of the shell casings found at the crime scene, and he had blood on him. Investigator Jared Bundren later described the moment of picking Thiesfeld up. He was calm, read him his rights. He invoked his rights, wanted his attorney. Bundren asked him to sign a waiver of extradition to return to Mississippi. He signed it, calm, cooperative, as if this too were a performance he had rehearsed. Back in Oxford, investigators moved through Thiesfeld's apartment with methodical care. What they found there built the case into something airtight. There was the handwritten letter on the legal pad, his own words confessing to the darkness that had always lived inside him. There was his internet search history, which told a story so deliberate it silenced everyone who heard it. On the day he returned to Oxford with the pistol, Thiesfeld's internet search history included searches for hollow-tip ammunition, the tactical face masks, and, chillingly, how convicted serial killer Ted Bundy lured victims. This was not a man who snapped. This was a man who researched. The surveillance infrastructure of the Oxford Square area and the surrounding roads had also captured him. Surveillance video from a store in Harmontown, Mississippi, recorded Allie and Thiesfeld together just hours before her body was found near that same location. Phone records placed both of their devices at the scene. The .40 caliber Glock recovered from his truck matched the 11 shell casings left in the dirt at Buford Ridge. The gun, prosecutors established, had been purchased by his father, Daniel Thiesfeld. The picture that assembled itself from all of this evidence was not complicated. It was devastating. On August 30th, 2019, a grand jury indicted Brandon Thiesfeld on a capital murder charge. He pleaded not guilty. Capital murder, meaning the state of Mississippi believed Thiesfeld had kidnapped Allie before killing her, which made him eligible for the death penalty. His defense team, led by attorneys Tony and Steve Farisi, began working to dismantle the kidnapping element of the charge. Their argument would eventually center on the claim that Allie went willingly, that she had gotten into that truck of her own free will, believing they were going to talk. Whether that is comforting or more devastating depends on how you choose to hold it. The COVID-19 pandemic created significant delays in the court system, pushing the trial back repeatedly through 2020 and into 2021. For Allie's family, for Keith and Cindy, for her brother Andrew, for every friend who had loved her, those 2 years were a particular kind of torment. The case was real. The killer was in custody. And still they waited. Finally, in August 2021, movement. With Thiesfeld facing a possible death sentence, and prosecutors knowing that a capital murder trial could be grueling, emotional, and risky for everyone involved, they presented the defense with an offer. Reducing the charge from capital murder to first-degree murder meant Thiesfeld would avoid the death penalty, but would serve life in prison. The defense accepted. On August 27, 2021, more than 2 years after Allie's body was found at the edge of a Mississippi lake, the Lafayette County Courthouse filled with people dressed in pink. Dozens of Allie's family and friends had come, wearing her favorite color. In the lobby, her loved ones had placed a basket of bracelets, prayer cards, and flowers for anyone to take, each one inscribed with the words, "Share my smile and spirit." Inside the courtroom, Brandon Thiesfeld stood before Judge Kelly Luther in an orange jumpsuit. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. Reporter Jake Thompson, who was in the courtroom, noted that it was the first time anyone had seen Thiesfeld show emotion. He broke down in tears as he spoke. His attorney read a portion of his statement to the court, in which he said he was sincerely sorry for the pain he had caused. He said there was no excuse for his actions. He said he had asked God for forgiveness. Then it was Cindy Costiel's turn to speak. She had waited more than 2 years for this moment. Which she stood in that courtroom, the same woman who had visited her daughter's apartment just days before she was murdered, who had bought beach-themed decor with her, who had heard Allie's voice for the last time on a Friday evening phone call, and she read her statement without flinching. "I wish I could have kept her away from this evil, callous, scheming, ungrateful, sinister, and violent, and corrupt monster," Cindy's statement read. "He had every opportunity to do good in the world, but he chose to do evil. Brandon, you belong in jail each day for the rest of your life for the heinous act you committed to such a sweet soul in Eli. Every time your cell door slams shut, may it be a reminder for what you did and the life you took from us." Judge Kelly Luther sentenced Brandon Thiesfeld to life in prison. Under Mississippi law, Thiesfeld is eligible to petition for a conditional release at the age of 65 once he has served at least 15 years of his sentence. His defense attorney, Tony Farese, would later call the case a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. District Attorney Ben Creekmore offered a different framing, one that spoke directly to every young woman who had ever stayed in a relationship that hurt her, hoping the person on the other side might finally show up. He said simply, "Love can blind us." Brandon Thiesfeld was transferred to the Mississippi State Penitentiary, known as Parchman, where he will serve his life sentence. The truck with the TAK3IT license plate was impounded. The Glock went into an evidence locker. The courtroom emptied slowly. People in pink, holding flowers and prayer cards, and the memory of a young woman who had deserved every single day that was taken from her. Justice, such as it is, had arrived, but for a family dressed in their daughter's favorite color. Standing in a courthouse in Mississippi, justice and healing are two very different destinations, and only one of them had been reached that day. When the courtroom emptied on August 27, 2021, and the people dressed in pink walked back out into the Mississippi heat, carrying their prayer cards and their bracelets engraved with Allie's words, "Share my smile and spirit," they carried something else too. Not closure exactly, not peace, not yet. Something more complicated and more human than either of those words allows. They carried the knowledge that justice had been served, and that it had not brought her back, and that both of those things were true at the same time. Since Brandon's sentencing, Keith and Cindy Costiel have preferred a private life away from the public eye. They still reside in St. Louis, Missouri, with their son Andrew and their dog, and they share cherished memories of Allie on social media, keeping her presence alive in whatever ways they can. They are not people who disappeared into their grief, though grief is where they live now. in some permanent room in their hearts that was not there before July 20th, 2019. Keith Costiel has said it still feels like Allie is simply away at school. Cindy has said through tears that she still doesn't believe it, that they are still in denial even years later. That denial is not weakness, for it is what happens when a mind encounters a loss it was never built to process. A 21-year-old girl who wanted home-cooked meals and beach-themed decor and a future in fashion and a life full of flowers does not simply become a memory. She becomes a permanent absence, a shape in the room where she used to stand. Cindy has said of Allie, "She was my life, my everything." There is no elaborating on that. There is nothing to add. Allie's friends, the women who held her close on the nights she cried about Brandon, who begged her to walk away, who had no idea that their worst fears about him were only a fraction of what he was actually capable of, have carried the weight of this case in their own ways. Her friends, Elizabeth Brock and Morgan Hull, have spoken about how they keep Allie alive in their daily lives. "Every time we see a sunset or a pink sunset," Brock said, "we're like, that's Allie." Hull added, "We just try to live for her and bring her light into the world." A sunset, pink light spreading across a Mississippi sky, or a St. Louis evening, or wherever these young women happen to be standing when the day ends. And in that light, a 21-year-old girl who taught yoga and loved karaoke and started a golf club and spent her summers teaching English to children in Peru and Africa, is somehow briefly present again. Allie's obituary reveals a dimension of her that gets lost in the coverage of how she died. She was a volunteer who traveled to Peru and Africa to teach English to young children. She was a half-marathon runner. She was a lifeguard, a babysitter, a member of the National Honor Society. She was, the obituary concludes simply, a beautiful spirit. Brandon Thiesfeld, meanwhile, is at the Mississippi State Penitentiary at Parchman, where he is serving his life sentence. Under Mississippi law, he is eligible to petition for a conditional release at the age of 65, once he has served 15 years. He was 24 years old when he was sentenced. The mathematics of that, a man who researched Ted Bundy's methods, who searched for silencers, who drove a young woman he had known for 3 years to a dark lake and shot her 9 times, potentially walking out of prison at 65, is one of the places where the justice system and true justice stop being the same thing. Before sentencing, a court-ordered mental evaluation conducted in October 2020 found Thiesfeld mentally competent to stand trial and competent at the time of the offense, legally sane, legally responsible. His own letter said something in him just did not work. His attorney said alcohol and cocaine made him snap. The prosecutor said he did it to get rid of a problem. All of those things can be true simultaneously, and none of them explain it, because there is no explanation that rises to the level of what was done. What this case reveals about our world is not comfortable. It reveals that a young man can spend years displaying every warning sign, the misogyny, the entitlement, the emotional manipulation, the violent streak, the substance abuse, and still move freely through a university campus, or still be seen as a daddy's boy with a pickup truck and a future, still be someone that people around him didn't quite take seriously enough to stop. In the immediate aftermath of Allie's murder, her friends and supporters rallied around the hashtag #JusticeForAllie hashtag, helping bring awareness to the growing epidemic of violence against women, noting that nearly half of all women who are murdered are killed by their partners or ex-partners. Ally was not a statistic when she was alive. She became one in death, one of the most painfully preventable statistics in America. The case also opened a conversation about warning signs in relationships that young people, particularly young women, are often not equipped to recognize or act on in time. Ally had told her friends he was crazy aggressive. Her friends had begged her to walk away, and she had even said it herself in her own words, and still she reached for something in him that was never there. That is not her failure. That is the architecture of emotional manipulation, which is designed specifically to keep people reaching. District Attorney Ben Creekmore captured it in the simplest possible terms: love can blind us. The CBS News 48 Hours episode titled "What Ally Costiel Didn't Know" brought renewed national attention to the case in 2022, and true crime podcasts have continued to revisit it, each time reaching new audiences, each time putting Ally's name in front of someone who might recognize something in her story that helps them see their own situation more clearly. That is a kind of legacy, imperfect, bittersweet, but real. Thiesfeld's own mother, Carrie Clay, issued a statement through their attorney that was equal parts grief and a plea directed at other families. She said she was heartbroken for every person impacted and crushed that her son had not shared with them the turmoil he was trying to manage. She urged every parent to regularly sit down with their children and young adults, emphasizing that there would never be anything too big, too complicated, or too out of control for a parent to help with. The pain in that statement is genuine. It is also the pain of a family, reckoning with what their silence and their son's silence ultimately cost another family everything. Ally Costiel was born on September 11, 1997, in St. Louis, Missouri. She was 21 years old when she died. She had 3 more semesters of college ahead of her, a marketing degree within reach, a dream of working in the fashion industry that she had been quietly building toward since she first set foot on a campus covered in flowers. She had a mother who cooked for her, and a father who visited her, and a brother who grew up beside her, and friends who called her the brightest light they had ever come across. She was a cheerleader, and a golfer, and a yoga instructor, and a mission trip volunteer, and a karaoke singer, and a woman who rearranged her apartment decor until it felt like home. She was someone who loved sunsets so deeply that every pink sky her friends see now carries her name. She deserved every day she was going to live. She deserved the graduation in the spring of 2020 that she would never reach. She deserved the career, the life, the home she would have made beautiful. She deserved to grow older. She deserved all of it. And a man she trusted took it from her in the dark at the edge of a Mississippi lake, and no sentence, no conviction, no documentary, no prayer card can give any of it back. But we can say her name. We can remember who she was before the last night of her life. We can let her be a person, not a headline. Ally Costiel was 21 years old, and she was loved, and she deserved more time. The world is quieter without her in it, and every sunset that touches the sky in pink is proof that the people who knew her have decided she is still somehow shining.